When the light fell from the sky, and the city turned into shadow, I understood that the sun would never shine the same again. I was only 14. That morning began with laughter and the smell of rice cooking, and ended burned forever into my skin and my memory. My name is Kenji Nakamura, I'm 94 years old, and I live now in a small house on the outskirts of Hiroshima. My mornings begin with a bowl of rice and a cup of green tea, which I prepare slowly, watching the cherry blossoms in my garden sway with the wind. Every spring when the petals fall to the ground, I'm reminded that life can bloom again, even after everything has turned to ashes. But there is one day that never leaves me, no matter how many years pass. A dawn that started like any other. Streetcars rattling down the tracks, children running, neighbors sweeping their doorsteps. And that, in a matter of seconds, became silence, ash, and emptiness. If I close my eyes, I can still return to that morning. It was August 6, 1945, and Hiroshima woke like any other day. The sun rose above the rooftops, painting the tiles gold with its gentle light. The air smelled of freshly cooked rice and miso soup simmering in kitchen pots. Mothers prepared breakfast. Children washed their faces with cold water, put on their school uniforms, and ran down wooden hallways laughing. Streetcars screeched softly along their rails, packed with workers heading to factories, shopkeepers with baskets of goods, dreamers hoping for a good day at the market. Life flowed quietly, ordinary, human, peaceful, as if nothing in the world could break that fragile rhythm. I was there walking through a narrow street, greeting my neighbors like every morning. Some swept their doorsteps, others watered small plants outside their homes. Women chatted about the summer heat, men argued about the price of rice, and children tossed pebbles at each other, pretending they were balls. It was a living city, joyful, innocent. No one imagined that, within hours, it would all turn to ash. That day Hiroshima breathed the future. There was fear, of course, the war still raged, but we had hope. We'd heard of bombings in other cities, yet Hiroshima had remained untouched, almost a refuge. A fragile island of calm in a sea of chaos. Many of us believed it would stay that way, that somehow fate had spared us. I looked around and saw faces full of hope, children dreaming of growing up, young couples talking about marriage, old men telling stories beneath the trees. It was a morning like so many others, and yet it would be the last. The last morning Hiroshima woke as a city full of life. My friend, the cruelest thing about memory isn't just what happened after. It's remembering so vividly what was lost. That morning began with laughter, dreams, the rhythm of normal life. And none of us knew that the sunlight we welcomed would soon be replaced by a light that didn't come from heaven, but from hell itself. That morning was calm, too calm, as if the entire universe had paused, holding its breath before releasing the most painful scream in history. Do you know what Hiroshima was before the bomb? It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a place of generals or parades of soldiers. It was a city that breathed life. Streets filled with small shops, markets echoing with the shouts of vendors calling their prices, streetcars clattering back and forth, their metallic rhythm marking the heartbeat of an ordinary day. Mornings were alive with familiar smells, the smoke of kitchen fires, the steam of rice, the warm scent of miso soup before work. On the corners, children waited for their teachers, wooden backpacks on their shoulders, laughing, chasing each other, as if the war were nothing but a distant rumor. At home, women hung laundry in the courtyards, talking, sharing news and worries, and laughter too. Life, even in scarcity, found ways to keep blooming. I remember walking through the market that morning. The air smelled of fresh fish, vegetables, and ripe fruit. Merchants sold what little they had, because the war had already emptied the shelves, but hope was still alive between every stall. Some spoke of weddings after the summer. Others dreamed of opening a small shop when better times came. The faces were tired, yes, but behind every face there was still humanity, simple dreams, small joys, the kind that make life worth living. Hiroshima wasn't a mighty city, my friend. It was an ordinary one. And that's what makes it so cruel. The inferno that came after didn't fall on soldiers or armies. It fell on men and women, on children and the elderly, on families who wanted nothing more than to keep living. Afternoons were peaceful. The river shimmered with sunlight. Small boats rocked gently with the current. Children ran barefoot along the banks, splashing in the water, their mothers watching with soft smiles from the shore. It was a postcard of peace, fragile but real. And from the temples the monks struck their bells. Deep, slow tones rolled through the city, as if reminding us that despite the war roaring beyond the horizon, Hiroshima was still a place where life made sense. My friend, can you imagine such a simple life? The rattle of the trams, the laughter of children, the smell of rice steaming in the air, the quiet glimmer of a sunlit river. That was Hiroshima. A heart beating in calm rhythm, a city breathing the future. And that is why remembering what came next hurts so deeply. Because everything that was human, warm, and ordinary would, in a single instant, be erased by a light that came not from the heavens, but from hell itself. Do you know what the strangest moment of that morning was? It wasn't the explosion. It wasn't the fire. It was the silence, that heavy, unnatural silence that fell over the city when no one expected it. Hiroshima was still alive. The markets were full of noise. Women still hung laundry in the sun. Children splashed in the river, laughing. And yet, something in the air began to change. I could feel it on my skin. A quiet, invisible breath brushing against me, carrying a warning I couldn't name. By mid-morning we heard it. A faint hum, a distant metallic whisper coming from the sky. It wasn't loud, just a thin vibration in the air. People looked up lazily. We were used to planes. They usually passed by. And many believed Hiroshima would remain untouched, as if the war had forgotten us. An old man beside me muttered, "It's nothing, just reconnaissance." He went back to arranging his goods. But I saw his hands tremble. The temple bells began to ring. Deep, slow notes blending with that faraway hum of engines. It felt as if the heavens themselves were tuning an invisible orchestra, before striking the final, devastating chord. Then the birds rose all at once, circling wildly, their wings slicing through the heat, as if they knew what we could not imagine. Children by the river pointed and laughed, thinking it was a game. But one mother's voice broke through, sharp, trembling, the kind of voice born from instinct. I closed my eyes. The sun burned my face. The air was thick and still, and I felt something tightening in my chest. Not fear, not yet, but a weight, a quiet pressure, a premonition too heavy to ignore. Time stopped. The whole city seemed to hold its breath. That was the silence of the sky, a strange, suffocating silence that turned every ordinary sound into a distant echo, a silence no one dared to name, but everyone felt deep inside. My friend, the cruelest part of memory is knowing that in those final minutes, there was still life, laughter, simple conversations, the warmth of an ordinary morning. And yet the sky had already made its choice. It watched us from above, waiting for the exact second, when the world would shatter into light and ash. I had never seen a light like that before, and I swear, even if I lived 1,000 years, I would never see it again. It was 8:15 in the morning. I had just stepped out of a narrow street, a half-empty bag in my hand, about to cross the bridge to reach the market. The sun was bright, typical for summer, but then, it happened. The sky opened, a flash, whiter than anything I could ever imagine. It wasn't sunlight. It wasn't lightning. It was something impossible. A brilliance that pierced through my eyes, my skin, my bones. Everything turned white. Absolute white. As if someone had torn the colors out of the world and replaced them with a single, blinding scream of light. Some say it lasted only a second, but I remember it as eternal. The air ignited inside my lungs. I didn't have time to run. Didn't have time to scream. Only one thought crossed my mind. The sky is falling. Then came the heat. Not the warmth of fire. Not the burn of the summer sun. A heat that cut through flesh like invisible blades. The bag in my hand dissolved. The ground trembled beneath me. And for an instant, there was nothing. Nothing. That silence was more terrifying than the light itself. It felt as if the world had been switched off. As if time had stopped breathing. I remember a man standing in front of me, his mouth open, staring upward. The light swallowed him whole. For a moment he wasn't there anymore. Then came the sound. A deep roar. The voice of 1,000 storms exploding at once. The air shattered, lifting me off the ground. I don't know if I was falling or flying. Only that the sky and the earth became one endless abyss. My eyes burned. My skin burned. Everything burned. The heat was so violent, I felt even my thoughts melt away. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear. There was only that impossible light. A light that devoured everything. My friend, I've spent my whole life trying to describe that moment, and every time I fail. It wasn't just a bomb. It was as if hell itself had opened a window and shown us its face. The people around me didn't scream. Not at first. There was no time. The screaming came later, when we realized we were still alive. But that first second of light was like dying and being born at the same time, in a world that no longer belonged to us. And the worst part? That light didn't illuminate. It erased. It erased houses, trees, bodies, memories, everything it touched. When I fell to the ground, the air was filled with burning dust. I tried to open my eyes, but all I could see were dark shapes, moving inside a glowing haze. A woman ran past me, her arms outstretched, her body burning without visible flames. Somewhere a child called my name, or maybe I imagined it, before his voice was lost in the roar. That impossible light was the beginning of the end, an eternal instant that still wakes me at night, because I can still feel it, burning my skin, blinding my dreams. They say it was brighter than 1,000 suns. But to me, it wasn't a sun. It was a wound torn open in the sky, a wound that never healed. The light vanished as quickly as it came, but what followed was even worse. The wave, that invisible monster, tearing through everything in the blink of an eye. First came the blow, a violent punch to my chest, as if a giant hand had struck me with pure rage. The air itself became a blade. It lifted me off the ground, hurled me against a wall, and suddenly there was no up or down, only a spinning storm of dust and fire. The houses, they didn't collapse. They disintegrated. Roofs flew away like dry leaves. Walls crumbled like wet paper. Windows burst into clouds of molten glass. Millions of shards slicing through the air like fiery arrows. I remember watching an entire street bend and twist, as if it were made of cardboard. The market, the same place that hours earlier was alive with voices and colors, became a nightmare of screams, smoke, and splintered wood. The trams that had carried workers to their jobs lay overturned, crushed against one another like broken toys. In the air itself burned. Breathing felt like swallowing fire. Each breath seared my throat, as if I were inhaling molten metal. The heat crept into my lungs, into my blood, into my bones. There was no escape. The entire world was burning. I saw bodies thrown through the air, carried by a force that had no name. A man was flung against a pole. For an instant his body hung there, then disappeared into the rising cloud of ash. A woman holding her child was blown so far away that I never saw her again. And I rolled across the ground, covered in blood and dust, not understanding how I was still alive. The roar was unbearable, not from a single direction, but from everywhere at once. It was the voice of the earth itself, a cosmic scream that swallowed everything. I tried to cover my head, but there was no shelter from that storm. The wind whipped my body so violently, I could feel my skin tearing apart. And yet, there were still no flames, only a blazing air so hot it turned matter into dust. Even the river, my childhood refuge, was struck. I saw a wave rise and crash against the banks, dragging people who had thrown themselves into the water, hoping to escape the fire. But not even water could cool that invisible flame. My friend, I will never forget that moment, when I thought everything was gone. The city, the streets, the people, the sound of life. All of it swept away by that wave of fire that left nothing standing. And as I lay there trembling, I realized something terrible. Hiroshima was no longer Hiroshima. The air was no longer air. It was fire. A fire you could breathe. A fire that burned you from the inside out, turning life itself into ash. That was the bomb's embrace. A deadly embrace of fire and wind that tore away everything we ever loved. There was a moment, when the dust finally began to fall, that I understood what had truly happened. It wasn't when I saw the ruins, or the burned bodies. It was when I saw the shadows. I staggered through the rubble, my skin burning, my throat filled with ashes. The air smelled of hot metal, of smoke, of flesh that should never have burned. And then I stopped, in front of a wall. There, where a person should have been, there was no body, only a dark mark. A perfect silhouette frozen in place, pressed into the stone. I couldn't move. It was as if that impossible light had erased a life in an instant, leaving behind only its shadow as witness. The figure looked peaceful, sitting as if resting, unaware that eternity was a breath away. I kept walking, and I saw more. Shadows on stairs, on temple walls, on the stones of the bridge. A mother holding a child. A worker, his hat tilted forward. A bowed figure, caught in the final instant before vanishing. They weren't ordinary shadows. The sun hadn't drawn them. They were scars of hell itself, etched into the city, a permanent photograph of death. My legs trembled. I touched one of those marks, afraid to disturb it, though I knew it would never fade. It felt cold, rough, and somehow alive, like touching the absence of someone who no longer breathed, but whose final outline remained, to prove they once existed. My friend, those shadows hurt more than the bodies I later found, because you can bury bodies, you can cry for them, but these figures were ghosts trapped in stone, silent witnesses that could never rest. Each one screamed a story, a life taken, a name forgotten, a future destroyed. I stood there shaking, unable to look away. That was the first legacy of the bomb. A city where people were gone, but their shadows remained. Black stains on white walls, invisible statues of absent flesh. And the cruelest part? Those shadows are still there, decades later. No one could erase them. No one dared. They are the scars of Hiroshima, etched not only into walls, but into our souls. Even now, when I close my eyes, I still see them, silent, motionless, eternal, shadows that ask for nothing, except to be remembered. My friend, if I close my eyes, I can still hear them, the screams, the most terrible sound a human being can carry inside his memory. After the blast, when the dust began to clear, the city stopped being a place of voices. No merchants calling out, no children laughing, no temple bells, only a chorus of agony, raw and human, rising from every corner of the broken world. I saw men walking naked, their clothes burned into their skin, their bodies covered in open wounds, their flesh hanging in shreds, and still they walked, like wandering ghosts, searching for water, for help, for answers that didn't exist. A woman crawled on her knees, her arms outstretched, her skin hung from her hands, like melted gloves. She whispered her daughter's name, but her voice was barely a thread of air. I wanted to reach her, but my own body refused to move. And I'll confess this to you, my friend, I was afraid to touch her, afraid to see that I too was broken inside. The children, oh the children, that memory haunts me most. Some ran aimlessly, their tiny bodies raw and red, screaming for their parents. Others were too weak to cry. I remember one boy, sitting in the middle of the street, holding his little sister in his arms. She wasn't breathing. He didn't move, didn't scream. He just rocked her gently, as if he could still wake her up. The air reeked of horror, burned flesh, smoke, blood boiling on scorched earth. A smell that clung to your throat, that made you retch, even when there was nothing left inside you. A smell that has never left my memory. And the screams went on, a human roar echoing through the ruins. Water. Help, mother. Simple words, repeated until the voice broke apart. I tried to walk, but every step dragged me deeper into hell. I saw an old man sitting on a stone, his body blackened, his breath faint. When I passed him, he grabbed my hand. His eyes said what his mouth couldn't. Don't leave me alone. And I kept walking, because I had no strength left to carry another soul. That decision still burns in me. On silent nights, my friend, the cruelest thing that day was not the light, nor the blast, nor even the fire. It was the sound of so many voices screaming at once, knowing that no one would come. It was a cry without an answer, an echo that struck the empty sky. And even now, when the night grows too quiet, that echo returns. I hear it inside me, and I feel that Hiroshima never stopped screaming. My friend, if I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The screams. The most terrible sound a human being can carry inside his memory. After the blast, when the dust began to clear, the city stopped being a place of voices. No merchants calling out, no children laughing, no temple bells. Only a chorus of agony, raw and human, rising from every corner of the broken world. I saw men walking naked, their clothes burned into their skin, their bodies covered in open wounds, their flesh hanging in shreds. And still they walked, like wandering ghosts, searching for water, for help, for answers that didn't exist. A woman crawled on her knees, her arms outstretched, her skin hung from her hands, like melted gloves. She whispered her daughter's name, but her voice was barely a thread of air. I wanted to reach her, but my own body refused to move. And I'll confess this to you, my friend, I was afraid. Afraid to touch her, afraid to see that I too was broken inside. The children, oh the children, that memory haunts me most. Some ran aimlessly, their tiny bodies raw and red, screaming for their parents. Others were too weak to cry. I remember one boy, sitting in the middle of the street, holding his little sister in his arms. She wasn't breathing. He didn't move, didn't scream. He just rocked her gently, as if he could still wake her up. The air reeked of horror, burned flesh, smoke, blood boiling on scorched earth. A smell that clung to your throat, that made you retch, even when there was nothing left inside you. A smell that has never left my memory. And the screams went on. A human roar echoing through the ruins. Water. Help. Mother. Simple words, repeated until the voice broke apart. I tried to walk, but every step dragged me deeper into hell. I saw an old man sitting on a stone, his body blackened, his breath faint. When I passed him, he grabbed my hand. His eyes said what his mouth couldn't. Don't leave me alone. And I kept walking, because I had no strength left to carry another soul. That decision still burns in me. On silent nights, my friend, the cruelest thing that day was not the light, nor the blast, nor even the fire. It was the sound of so many voices screaming at once, knowing that no one would come. It was a cry without an answer, an echo that struck the empty sky. And even now, when the night grows too quiet, that echo returns. I hear it inside me, and I feel that Hiroshima never stopped screaming. If the explosion was an instant hell, what came after was an endless purgatory. The days following August 6th weren't days at all. They were shattered pieces of eternity, each one made of pain. At first, everything was smoke and fire. But when the flames finally began to die, what remained was a silence, more painful than any roar. Hiroshima no longer breathed. It was a dead city, covered in ash. The streets were piles of black stone, the rivers watery graveyards, the temples wooden skeletons. And among those ruins, there were us, the ones who, for some reason, had survived. Though, survive is a cruel word, my friend, because what we did in those days wasn't living. It was crawling through ashes, our bodies burning, our souls shattered. People searched for water in filthy puddles, in wells filled with ash, in rivers poisoned with death. I remember taking a sip from the river, and tasting iron, smoke, despair. Some couldn't even swallow. Their throats were burned from the inside. Others threw themselves to the ground, licking the rain that began to fall, not knowing that the black rain carried poison too. The wounds were impossible to heal. There weren't enough doctors, nor medicine, nor hands to tend to so much suffering. People used dirty rags to cover burns, what leaves to ease the pain. I saw mothers tear pieces of their own clothing to wrap their children's wounds, even knowing nothing could stop the infection spreading beneath their skin. And then came something even crueler, the radiation. We didn't know its name then, but we felt it in our flesh. Those who seemed less hurt began to bleed from the mouth, from the nose, from their ears. Their hair fell out in clumps. Their bodies weakened day by day, until they could no longer rise. It was as if death had decided to stay a while, calm, patient, taking us one by one. I remember walking among the rows of bodies, laid out on the ground, some still breathing, others not. There was silence, so much silence, broken only by a distant moan, a silence that screamed louder than any human voice. My friend, the days after the bomb were harsher than the explosion itself, because while the fire had been swift, the death that followed was slow, silent, merciless. Each sunrise was a cruel reminder that the city had been erased from the map, but not from suffering. Hiroshima was dust, and we, the ones left behind, were living shadows, wandering through ruins, asking ourselves why we were still breathing. After those days, nothing was ever the same again. No matter how many years have passed, no matter how many seasons have come and gone, August 6th never left me. It's carved into my skin, my bones, my memory. The scars weren't only the ones you could see. Yes, many of us carried burns that never fully healed, dark stains that whispered of fire, wounds that ached whenever the weather changed. But the deepest scars were invisible, the ones we carried in our souls. I remember my childhood friend, Akiko. She survived, but lost her entire family. For years she never laughed again. Whenever someone said the word summer, she would lower her head and go silent. And even after she married, even after she had children, there was always a shadow in her eyes, one that never left her. There was another man, Hiroshi. He went blind from the flash. He told me that, in his dreams, he could still see that impossible light, wider than 1,000 suns. And when he woke, there was only darkness. His life became an endless contrast between that blinding light and the eternal night that followed. As for me, I still feel the heat on my skin. There are nights I wake drenched in sweat, certain my body is burning again. The smell of burning flesh, the screams, the shadows on the walls, they never left me. They live with me still, quiet companions of my sleepless nights. And yet, somehow we survived. We stood up. We rebuilt. We kept going. Not because the pain faded. It never did. But because we understood that if we didn't keep living, no one would remember what happened. My friend, life after Hiroshima was like walking with a weight on your heart that you could never put down. An entire generation was marked, not just by the visible scars, but by the unerasable memory of a single instant that changed everything. Every laugh that returned to the city was a miracle. Every child born afterward was proof that life, against all odds, refused to die. But none of us ever forgot. None. Because living after Hiroshima was to live with the memory of light, of fire, of silence, a life forever marked. What happened in Hiroshima did not end that summer. The bomb didn't just destroy a city, it destroyed all of us, in one way or another. The buildings were rebuilt. The streets came back to life. The temples rang their bells again. Children returned to play in the parks. But the shadow of the bomb never left. It stayed with us, clinging to our skin, to our souls, to every corner of the world that knew what had happened. Hiroshima became a mirror, one in which humanity saw its own face, and it was a terrifying one. For the first time we understood that we held in our hands a power, capable of erasing entire cities in an instant, a power that didn't distinguish between soldier and child, between temple and marketplace, between dream and sin. It was the power of total destruction. I've seen entire generations look at those shadows burned into the walls, at the scars etched on the survivors, and whisper, "How could we have gone this far?" And still, there is no answer. The memory of Hiroshima isn't just mine, my friend. It belongs to everyone. Because what happened that day was not a punishment for one city. It was a warning for all of humanity. Every bomb, every weapon, every threat since then carries, hidden within it, the memory of Hiroshima. And yet, mankind still plays with fire. Whenever I hear talk of wars, of nuclear arms, of strategic deterrence, my heart tightens. Because I know, because I lived it, what it means for an entire city to vanish in a second. It's not numbers. It's not statistics. It's faces, screams. Its entire lives erased, as if they had never existed. Hiroshima, my friend, is not just a place on a map. It's a wound on the conscience of the world. A shadow that follows us generation after generation. A warning carved in fire and ash of what humans can do to one another when compassion is forgotten and power becomes more important than mercy. And that's why, every time someone speaks the word Hiroshima, I don't hear a name. I hear broken bells, interrupted laughter, and the silence of the sky before the light. Hiroshima is not memory. Hiroshima is presence. It is living memory, the shadow that walks beside us, reminding us that we must never, ever repeat it. I've told you what my eyes saw that morning of August 6th. I've taken you through those streets once filled with life, through the silence of the sky, through the impossible light and the fire that erased everything. I've told you about the shadows burned into the walls, and the screams that still echo in my nights. And now, as my hands tremble, and my voice fades with the years, there's one last thing I need to say. We must never forget. Memory is all we have left to fight against oblivion. Because if the world forgets what happened in Hiroshima, then all that pain will have been for nothing. Every lost child, every mother who screamed until her final breath, every shadow imprinted on the concrete, all of it will vanish if we allow silence to bury it. I was there, my friend. I felt the heat burning my skin. I heard the survivors begging for water. I saw an entire city turn to ash. And as long as I have breath, I will keep telling you this story. Not to haunt you with the memory, but to protect the future. When you hear the word Hiroshima, don't think only of a date or a chapter in a history book. Think of faces. Hear the screams. Feel the heavy silence that hung in the air before the explosion. Understand that the bomb was not just a weapon. It was humanity's most brutal warning to itself. My friend, this is my oath. As long as I breathe, as long as I can speak, I will carry the story of that day. Because the world needs to remember, even when it hurts. Because the dead deserve to be named, even when their voices are gone. Because if we ever forget, we risk repeating it. August 6, 1945 does not belong only to Hiroshima. It belongs to all of us. And as long as someone tells the story, as long as someone listens, the memory will live on. So carve it into your heart, my friend. Never forget. Never repeat. That is the only inheritance left to us. After the shadow of the bomb. This was the story of Hiroshima, the city that, in a single instant, went from the calm of dawn to the shadow of the bomb. Thousands of lives vanished beneath an impossible light, but their memory still burns, a flame that will never go out. I saw it. I felt it on my skin. And though time has covered my scars, in my heart they remain as raw as that very day. That's why I tell you this story, because as long as someone listens, they are still here. And I promise you, this won't be the last story. More will come. Of cities that resisted, of men and women who fought, of memories that deserve to be remembered, because every lost voice from the past deserves to be heard again, not as a number, but as a whisper of humanity. My friend, as long as my voice endures, I will keep telling you these stories, so that we never forget, so that memory walks beside us, like an eternal bell, ringing in the silence of the sky,